Are leaders born or made? This is the IssuesWatch podcast. Hi, I'm Don Meyer, Chief Marketing Officer at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the IssuesWatch podcast. Great leaders have the ability to understand the way people feel and then make appropriate judgments to avoid or solve problems. Not everyone is a natural-born leader, if there even is such a thing, and there are strategies anyone can use to improve their leadership. Similarly, there are a handful of mistakes to avoid if you want to be a good leader. Every leader has their own style, but there are certain characteristics all great leaders share. Here with me to discuss some of those characteristics is Thomas Metelski. As an executive coach, he has 20 years of experience working with top-tier global companies in the telecommunications, chemical, medical device, and fast-moving consumer goods industries. Not only is Thomas a CPA, he also completed the Upright Citizens Brigade sketch and improv programs and has performed stand-up at various top-tier New York City comedy club showcases. Welcome back, Thomas.
Don, it's absolute pleasure. I'm very excited to be back. And I don't know if you noticed this, but over my shoulder here, you're going to see two jackets. And when I was here last time, we talked about the infamous SNL 5-jacket award or prize. So yes. This is my second one, Don. We got 3 more to go. Last I was checking.
Yeah, that's why for those listeners and watchers that did not see the first podcast or listen to the first podcast that Thomas was on, this is Thomas's second time. So I was actually going to mention the SNL skit where they recognize the 5-timer club. We will have to come up with a specialized jacket with our logo on it. All right, well, let's actually go back to the topic of that last podcast where we talked about enhanced people skills. And for the folks who didn't watch last time, enhanced people skills, it's soft skills by a better name, let's say. Yes. So let's talk about why enhanced people skills are so important to leadership.
That's a great question, and I appreciate you going back to that. So from an accounting perspective, we know technical skills are paramount in terms of what gets you in the door, in terms of processing what has to happen. And those are great when you start your career and you're starting to sharpen. But as you move up, you start to interact with more of your colleagues, you start to interact more with your peers, and even more so with your clients. So to have the ability to have those skills transfer outside of a non-technical arena are kind of critical. And we look at it in terms of 3 different buckets where people have these we call them people skills, and we like to enhance them. So therefore EPS, which is actually another great moniker for CPAs. So we look at it from 3 different lenses, so to say. One is that core values framework. So who are you? And how do you get comfortable with what that is? Because once you, as I say, you know thyself, it's much easier to sort of interact and sort of understand other people. Then we look at things from a transactional perspective and a transformational perspective. So once you understand who you are, then you can really dive into those skills that transform yourself and others. So in other words, if you're working with teams and clients, how do you get them to move? How do you motivate? How do you sort of get people energized in order to help them reach their goals? And then there's the day-to-day sort of transactional skills. What is it that you are doing with individuals on a day-to-day basis that are influencing them and helping them reach their objectives? So we look at these things through 3 lenses, so to say, and it really encapsulates what a whole professional could be. So obviously there's, we referred to before as those technical skills or those hard skills, but that with these other elements truly make you a well-rounded professional and set you up and your firm for success.
And I would think with AI, a lot of concern about AI and what kind of work is AI going to do within the accounting profession, and what types of work is it going to take away from existing professionals. People skills are going to become that much more important because that's something that obviously artificial intelligence can't do.
Yes. Well, yeah, and there's a lot of research in this area. So in the accounting profession, as well as the coaching and the leadership development space, AI is an incredibly hot topic right now. And you're even seeing firms shift. There's been a tremendous amount of investment in some of the larger firms around AI. And what does that mean? So you're right. And what it does is it takes the ability to do more of those technical work and get that right at your fingertips, which frees you up to do those other things that, may be non-technical in nature, but can enhance the work that you do. So AI is going to play an absolute critical role in terms of what's happening as we move forward. We already see that impacting how people are leading, how people are working, and what lenses do they look at leadership through. AI is impacting that as well. So it's an incredible topic, and there's a lot of activity. So, for example, NYU is hosting recently, last couple of years, a workshop or a seminar on coaching and technology. And the last couple of years, it's all been about AI. What are the impacts and what does it mean going forward? So it's really incredible.
Oh, that's great. Now, one thing that AI can't do, or not can't do yet, or doesn't possess that a human does, is listening skills. And you wrote an article about listening skills for the spring 2024 issue of New Jersey CPA magazine. And I think everyone would agree that listening is an important element of good leadership. And in the article, you listed 3 key concepts CPAs can apply to improve their listening skills immediately. So can you review those concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, listening is probably one of the most foundational and essential elements for leadership. And it can't be underestimated. And Don, we can spend hours and days on this topic. And that article was really meant to give a quick introduction into what are some of those things that you can do right away to immediately impact what's happening, because listening can be so critical. So one of the things I talked about in that article was awareness. And awareness is one of those 5 A's I talked about previously, but it's one of the things that you have to have, because without awareness, you cannot shift or change anything. So your awareness or your intention of what you're going to do with a conversation or how you're entering a situation is going to be very critical in terms of what happens. So when you're listening, you really have to be aware of what you're doing. I mean, an example could be of, how many times have you've been driving around your neighborhood and then all of a sudden you make a turn and why did I even do that? Why did I even go down this route? It's because you weren't being aware of what you were doing or conscious in terms of what was happening. So that's like the first big thing that we can do around listening. Another thing is around your focus. It's important to have sort of a conscious focus in what you're doing when you engage others. So what do I mean by that? Once we engage, you and I, so right now I'm very aware that we're in a podcast here and we're talking about certain things. Now I have a choice. I can either think about the water bottles that's to my right. I can think about what I'm going to have for lunch or maybe dinner later, or I can think about engage directly with you and say, Don, what is he concerned about? Where is my focus? Am I putting my focus in me, or am I putting all my focus on you, Don? Am I trying to understand what is it that I can be of service to? So from that perspective, focus is really something that it sounds very simple, but when you put it in motion, it has a real impact on the other person, because they can actually feel that. They can feel your interest. I mean, how many situations have you been to when you go to a networking event and you talk to somebody, and then all of a sudden you just see a slight gaze, or they just look over your shoulder because they're looking for some other people that are walking in. Oh yeah, that's great. We've done a lot of work in this specific area, and you're looking at them, they're not even paying attention to you because their focus is not on you. And the last thing that I talk about is engaging in curiosity. So once you've made a conscious intention to focus on this individual or this other person or this group that you're speaking about, be curious. What is it that other person is interested in? What is it that they're engaged in? So once you have these very simple elements, you can change your level of engagement with another person almost instantly by just using those 3 simple techniques.
Now, I know one of the things that I've heard when I've either read or listened to someone talk about listening skills is one of the things that they tell people not to do is don't think about how you're going to respond or what your response is going to be to what they're saying, because then you lose focus, as you were saying. So how can you be curious? How can you participate in the conversation, but maybe not obsess so much on responding to what the person is saying and continuing to listen to what the person is saying?
That is a great question, and that's a skill that people have to work on. And I will tell you, it took me a long time to really, really try to get good at that. And I'll share an example with you. And I learned this through, believe it or not, acting school, acting techniques, and improv. And one of the issues that I always had was I wasn't able to be in the moment. And that's because I was doing exactly what you had mentioned, Don. I was thinking about what was next. I was thinking about, what do I say? Am I going to be funny? How is this going to be perceived? As opposed to taking all that and throwing that all away and just trusting myself that I've done the work, that I've done what's necessary, and then put all my attention and focus on the other person. And this can be a little scary because most time when people speak or when they're talking and they're engaging, they're just waiting for the other person to sort of stop talking so they can interject what they want. And once you do that, you're not really actively listening. You're not engaging. When you hear the voices in your head saying, "What do I want to talk about next? What should I be concerned about?" As soon as you do that, in that moment, you realize the attention is not on the other person because you're not taking them in. You're not listening and hearing to not only their voice, but what is their body language? What are they telling you? So when you release yourself and you forget about all that stuff and try to trust yourself that when you need that information, it's going to be there, which is the toughest part. That's what you have to do, is all the attention on the other person and trust that when you want to grab that details or that information, it will be there for you. So that's one of the toughest things to try to do, but practice makes perfect. So as I said, awareness and then focus. And then through that focus, you're going to start to be curious and ask yourself questions about that other person, the individual, that room, or that group.
And I guess working on that skill of not thinking about your response and maintaining focus on someone could also help with another issue. Excuse me, I've been reading more and more about recently, and that is people interrupting. It feels like everyone feels like that they can't get a complete sentence out because everyone is interrupting them. And I think it's part of it is people don't want to wait for that quiet moment to say what they want to say. They're just jumping in right then and there. So I guess that kind of all goes together, that you need to maintain focus. You need to be curious and kind of wait for that moment when it's okay to respond. And I've heard listening described as it's a game of tennis. It's a back and forth. It's a back and forth, and you're not going to be able to put away everything that you want to say and store it up without maintaining focus on that individual on the other side of the net, so to speak.
Yeah, well, that goes to the intention. What is the intention of the discussion? Are you just trying to get your point across, or are you there to learn something, or maybe engage with an individual? So that's why, some of these things, it takes time to do that because and it takes work. I'm guilty of that still to this day, and I have to remind myself. So it takes a lot of work, but I think if you think about awareness and the intention, and you try to understand what is this other person what are we trying to do, and then move from that space, then those interruptions or your desire to interrupt will dissipate because you're so engaged in that other person. There'll be that tennis match, right? They will realize you're bringing them in, and then all of a sudden they will see that maybe you've got a question or a curiosity. Then they'll invite you in. So that's when that lobbying or that volleying of that ball will come back and forth. And when you have that, it's magic. I mean, one of the other things I love to do is observe people who are experts in this field. So one of my favorites is Oprah. If you watch Oprah when she does an interview, it's amazing because what happens is she speaks, but then she takes that whole person in and she lets them flourish. She lets them articulate and expand in what she's doing. And she's very skilled if she is going to interject, how to interject and when. And you think of her career over time, that's a skill that she's developed for a long time. So take a look at what Oprah does in interviews, and you'll be amazed at how skillful somebody can be once they practice certain techniques.
I think you said something earlier too, which I think is also really important, not just for listening, but also for networking. You said people should think about, how can I help them? How can I help this person that I'm speaking to? And if you have that type of mindset, you're not going to be so quick to jump in with your own opinion or your own thoughts, because you're going to be thinking about what they're saying and how to respond to that.
Yeah, there's no question. And by the way, there's an example of good listening, Don. You were taking what I was taking and you sort of articulated that.
That would be embarrassing if I wasn't actually listening to what you were saying.
Well, I'd be surprised what happens. But you're absolutely right. And from a networking perspective, a lot of people have certain objectives, what they want to do from networking. But how can you really be of service to another if you don't even hear or understand where their issues or where their problems are? A lot of times people tend to pontificate and tell you how good they are and tell you what services they are and tell you what they can alleviate without really understanding, wait a minute, am I even being of service? Am I being helpful? Is what I'm doing going to provide value for the other individual? And only when you have that can you really start to engage another person. Otherwise, we've all seen this, we've all felt this. People just come up and it's just a sales pitch, as opposed to really engaging and connecting with another person. And then you start to form this basis of trust. And then once you have that, then you can really start to have that tennis match.
Right. And that's a great segue into our next question about leadership. So you're presenting a session at our annual convention and expo in Atlantic City in June, and it's titled Unlocking Leadership Excellence, the Vital Role of Enhanced People Skills. So the session description uses words like empower and inspire. And is this a different way of looking at leadership than a generation ago?
There's no question. What has happened in the space of leadership in my short period of time, let's just say the last 30 years or so, has been leaps and bounds. And especially, I would say, the last 10 years has been really incredible in terms of what's happening. So it used to be almost like this command and control aspect from a leadership perspective. And a lot of those leadership tendencies and a lot of that leadership training was really targeted towards a select few, sort of the higher level.
The great man idea of leadership.
The great fallacy, we should also say there.
Right. Yeah.
And what we see now is that there is a delivery of a lot of that information to more people, so more people can understand, what is, leadership. And by the way, we really have to make a certain dichotomy here too, because we talk about leadership in this big, broad sense, but there's a demarcation I think we need to talk about, because leadership, it really evolves into two areas. There's the leader, and then there's leadership. Mm-hmm. So we always tend to use leadership, but we forget that becoming a leader is a lot different than leadership. Leader is training the individual, the person, in terms of how they connect and things of that nature. Leadership is everything else. So when we talk about leadership, we really have to define what it means, because it could mean something very different to Price Waterhouse than what it means to Johnson & Johnson. So those things are really critical. And the research has borne that out over the last 25 years or so. And now leadership, we find, is needs to be more collaborative in nature. The command and control model is pretty much dead. Are there situations and times where maybe that's necessary? Yes. But generally for a leader, in terms of how they're developing and how they're training, there's much more in terms of collaboration. There's much more in terms of humility, which is a key characteristic of a great leader. So there's been tremendous advances in that space.
And over the last, I guess, 20 or so years, we've seen more companies and organizations going to a flat structure. So there may be one or two leaders on top, but if you have a flat structure, you need more leadership, to your point, from those folks that no longer are reporting to, an endless series of vice presidents or directors and things like that.
Yeah, spans and layers have definitely changed over time. And it's how you interact. I mean, I love this stuff, and I live and breathe it all the time. I'm surrounded by all this stuff. So if you bear with me, I do have something I keep next to me. It's an article from the Leadership Quarterly, which is a leadership publication. It's very well known. It's one of these periodicals that's heavily researched and done by professionals. And this article is called "Advances in Leadership and Leader Development: A Review of 25 Years of Research and Theory." So when we started talking about this topic, I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. And I want to share something, just a quick read. And this has to do with Authentic leadership development. Now, I don't know about you, Don, but 25 years ago, I wasn't being taught or talked about authentic leadership development. And
No, definitely not.
yeah, there's a line here I want to share because it goes into the heart of a lot of the work that I'm doing and I do with leaders in leadership development. It says researchers have also stressed the importance of values and behaviors to the understanding and development of authentic leadership. Emotions and values play a fundamental role in the emergence and development of authentic leadership. I mean, mic drop right there. I mean, if that doesn't understand or demonstrate the change that has happened over leadership in the past 25 years or so, I don't know what else would demonstrate it. So it is really exciting to have this type of energy being put in because people now are starting to crave that. And recent events through the pandemic have really just accelerated that need.
Do you think it's also somewhat generational? I mean, you said the definition of good or effective leadership has evolved over the years, particularly as the millennial generation has replaced baby boomers as the largest segment of the workforce. Do you think today's young professionals need or even demand a different type of leadership?
Without a doubt. And that definition of effective leadership will continue to evolve as business evolves, as we evolve, and even with the advent of something like you mentioned, AI earlier, right? So that
Right.
brings in that whole other question of what does leadership. So for people entering the workforce now, do they demand it? Possibly. I think we should demand it of ourselves to ensure that those coming into the workforce are really experiencing the type of careers that are necessary for success going forward. So absolutely, I think that we need to change how we talk about leader development and leadership development. There's no question in my mind. And there's just an incredible amount of research in this area that talks that universities and colleges, and we may have talked about this before, are not necessarily preparing individuals for leader or leadership roles within organizations. The research is quite clear in this. So what happens is the burden shifts to organizations to basically train individuals from that respect. And why do we know this, or what's a way we can see this? The learning and coaching space globally is a $14 billion industry. So there is a significant need for organizations to really understand their workforce and say, what are the type of leaders that we want? How do you want to engage people? And that is shifting slowly, but surely it is shifting. So there's no doubt there is demand, especially as people enter the workforce, to understand what is the new dynamic and how do we become successful? Because it's a different paradigm now. What am I getting out of work today? And then how can I contribute to your organization? Those are different questions than maybe I faced when I started, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. We want to make sure that we leave some nuggets for your presentation at the convention in June. So I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to say, Thomas, again, it was a great conversation. Thanks again for joining us today.
Don, I can't thank you enough for having me. This is such an important topic that's going to have a tremendous amount of impact to the industry. And I really thank NJCPA for leading the charge and understand what this means to their workforce and their firms going forward. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the plug. And we'll see you a third time sometime down the road.
All right. I'm going to add to my count here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening or watching. For more information about enhanced people skills or how to become a better listener and leader, check out Thomas's podcast, The Value of Values, in your favorite podcast app. You can also find more information about leadership by visiting njcpa.org/hub/leadership, including Thomas's article, What Does Jimi Hendrix Have to Do with Listening Skills? Lastly, plan to attend the NJCPA Convention and Expo, June 11th through 14th in Atlantic City, to see Thomas and all of our other great speakers. Register at njcpa.org/convention.